Hoofstuk 20, 'n ander lewe. Toe ek klaar gepraat het, bly ouma 'n ruk lank stil. Wel, dit was 'n besonder onnoosel ding om aan te vang, sê sy op laas. Ek kan aan 'n hele klomp verskonings vir my optrede dink. Dit was veronderstel om 'n poets te wees. Die klippe was nie deel van die plan nie. Dit het sommer net gebeur. Nie een van ons het geweet meneer Karelse het klein kindertjies nie. Althans, ek het nie geweet nie. En Ryan seker ook nie. Maar ek het reeds al daardie verskonings gebruik. Ek glimlag wrang. Lyk my dis my spesiale talent om onnosele dinge aan te vang. Ek het na die tyd meneer Karelse se profiel op Facebook gaan soek. Hy het 2 dogtertjies. Een van die foto's op sy profiel is minder as 'n maand terug by sy oudste dogtertjie se verjaarsdag geneem. Sy het 4 geword. Volgens die polisie was die kinders doodverskrik terwyl die toiletpapier en klippe op die dak gereën het. My ouma trommel 'n ruk lank met haar vingers op die Land Rover se stuurwiel. 'n Ander lewe, Another Life is the heading for chapter 20. After he'd finished speaking, Oma was quiet for a while. And then she says to Luan, that probably was a rather stupid thing to do. And Luan can think of a whole lot of excuses for his behavior that night, because it was just supposed to be a trick that they were playing on the teacher. And stones weren't part of the plan. That just happened. And not one of them knew that Mr. Carlson had some small children, or had small children. At least Luan says he didn't know that, and he doesn't think that Ryan knew either. But he's already used all those excuses. And he smiles and he says, it seems it's my special talent to do stupid things. After the incident, back before he went off with his gran, obviously, he had spent some time looking at Mr. Carlson's profile on Facebook, and he realizes now Mr. Carlson had 2 daughters. In one of the photos of his profile, which was taken less than a month ago, it was his daughter's 4th birthday. And according to the police, the children were extremely terrified while it was raining toilet paper and stones on the roof of their house. His gran drums for a while with the fingers on the Land Rover's steering wheel. Luan, sê sy uiteindelik, ek wil vanmiddag vir jou een ding vertel. Luan, she says, finally, or eventually, this afternoon I want to tell you something. Sonder 'n woord staar ek na die wollerige dobbelstene wat aan die triespeeltjies swaai. Ek weet nie of ek krag het vir die preek wat kom nie. Maar nou ja, ek verdien dit seker. Maak nie saak wat enige iemand sê nie. Ek is blerrie trots op jou. Ek kyk verbaas na haar. Moenie so verbaas lyk nie, sê sy. Dit was 'n baie dapper ding om Dolores by daardie kerkbazaar te steel. Dom, maar dapper. Dis nie so 'n ding wat meeste seuns van jou ouderdom sou doen nie. Jy het dalk nie altyd verstand nie, maar jy het hart. Ek is nie seker wat om te sê nie. Dis seker een van die vreemdste komplimente wat ek nog ooit gekry het. En terwyl ons nou van skape praat, gaan sy voort. Hier is vir jou 'n stukkie raad. Die vat dit of los dit soort. Ek het daardie Lana meisie dopgehou. Sy is nie 'n skaap nie. Sy volg haar eie kop en sy is nie deel van enige trop nie. As jy regtig van haar hou, sal jy dit in gedagte moet hou. Fantasties. Die dag as jou ouma jou moet vertel hoe om 'n meisie te beïndruk, moet jy weet jy is regtig verlore vir die samelewing. Ouma Alice klim uit die Land Rover. Sy gaan staan teen die engine kap terwyl sy oor die veld staar. Ek klim ook uit. Without a word, Luan stares at the top of page 110. Luan stares at the woolly dice. You get some, often in taxis, or in most cars, I suppose, every now and then you find dice, like dice covered with like wool, or like a material, wool. I think it says wool anyway. Wollerig. And he doesn't know if he really wants to get another talking to from his gran. But he thinks, well, he probably deserves it. Ek verdien dit seker. His gran says to him, doesn't matter what anybody says. I am bloody proud of you. And he looks at her and he's quite surprised. And she says, don't be so surprised. It was a very brave thing you did to steal Dolores from that church bazaar. Dumb, but brave. This isn't the kind of thing that most boys of your age would do. You perhaps don't have you didn't make the brightest decision, but at least you've got heart. Luan's now not sure what to think, what to say. It's probably one of the strangest compliments he's ever had. And while we're speaking of sheep, his grand carries on, here's a bit of advice for you. It's the sort of take it or leave it type of advice. I've been watching this Lana girl, and she's no sheep. She follows her own head, and she's not part of any a trop is I'm thinking tribe. She's not part of any hasn't got like a herd mentality. Or what do you call a group of sheep now? Sasha, what do you call a group of sheep? Come on, you're a sheepdog. Anyway, so she's not part of a herd or a flock. There we go. If you really like her, you need to keep that in mind. Fantastic. The day that your gran has to tell you how to impress a girl, then you know you are lost to civilization. But Alice climbs out of the Land Rover. She goes and stands near the engine hood while she stares over the veld. Luan also climbs out. Jy wil my vra oor oom Jackson, nee, sê sy. Nee, jok ek. Sy blaas haar asem stadig uit. Ons het mekaar leer ken toe ek pas uit die skool was, sê sy. Ek was van jongs af kunsagtig. Na skool wou ek fotografie gaan studeer. Maar my pa het geweier. Destyds het dinge anders gewerk as nou. Mevrou was nie veronderstel om te gaan studeer nie. Veral nie iets nutteloos en onbruikbaars soos 'n kunsrigting nie. Jy moes trou en kinders kry. Nou ja, ek het werk gekry as kassier by die bank. Kort daarna is Jackson as skoonmaker aangestel. Hy is 'n slim man, maar destyds het min breinmense goeie werk gekry. Een middag in etenstyd het ek toevallig gesien hoe Jackson sit en teken. Sy kry 'n ver af glimlag. Ons het vriende geraak. Hy was so anders as die ander mense wat ek geken het. Intelligent en kunssinnig. Vol buitengewone fantastiese idees. Ek het skelm vir hom kunsboeke begin aandra. Want daardie jare is breinmense nie eens toegelaat om boeke by die wit mense se biblioteek uit te neem nie. My ouma kyk glad nie vir my nie. Dit klink of sy met haarself praat. Dit laat my skuldig voel, asof ek besig is om iets af te luister wat nie regtig vir my ore bedoel is nie. So, Gran climbed out of the Land Rover and she was sort of leaning against the engine hood. And then she said to Luan, I suppose you want to know about Jackson. And he lied and he said no. But she blew out her breath and she said, yeah, so we got to know each other when I was at school, when I just left school. From when I was very young, I was very arty. And after school, I wanted to study photography, his gran tells him. But her father refused to let her study photography. In those days, things were different to the way they work now. In those days, a woman wasn't supposed to go and study, and especially not something as useless and stupid as something in the art direction. You needed to get married and have children. Anyway, so she got a job as a cashier at the bank, and just after that, Jackson started to work at the bank as a cleaner. He was a clever man, but in those days, few black or colored people got good jobs. One afternoon, during lunchtime, she accidentally noticed that Jackson was sitting and drawing. And then she got like a far away smile on her face. And they became friends, she said. He was so different to the other people that she knew. He was intelligent and he was very good at art and arty things. He was full of unusual, fantastic ideas. And on the sly, she started to take out art books for him. because in those days colored people weren't even allowed to go to the library of the white people to take out books. And his gran is not even looking at Luan anymore. It sounds as though she's talking to herself. And Luan almost feels guilty, as though he is busy listening in to something that's not really meant for his ears. Jy kan raai wat gebeur het. Ons het verlief geraak, hals oor kop. Ruk lank kon ons dit geheim hou, maar toe vind my pa daarvan uit. Sy glimlag skree weg. Ek neem aan julle het op skool van apartheid geleer? Ek knik. Dan sal jy weet, 'n verhouding oor die kastige kleurgrens was daardie tyd onwettig. Oom Jackson het altyd gespot en gesê, dis 'n wonderwerk dat die regering nie jellybabies ook verbied het nie. Soveel kleure mense saam in een pakkie. Ons kon albei in die tronk beland het. Laat een nag het Jackson aan my venster kom klop. Sy gesig was stikkend geslaan. Een van my pa se vriende was 'n polisieman. Hulle het by Jackson se huis opgedag en hom gedreig. Gesê as hy nie pad gee uit die dorp nie, gaan die hele ding op die lappe kom en ons albei se toekoms verwoes. Jackson het sy lewe gewaag om daardie aand aan my venster te kom klop. Hy het gesê hy het 'n geleentheid Kaap toe gekry, saam met vriende van sy pa. Die politieke situasie was lankal besig om te erg te raak. Hy wou oorsee gaan, kuns gaan swat en oorsee by die struggle betrokke raak. En hy wou hê ek moes saamkom. Ek sluk toe ek sien hoe sy 'n traan wegvee. Dis die heel eerste keer dat ek haar sien huil. So his gran says, you can imagine what happened. We eventually fell in love. And for a while, they managed to keep it a secret. But then, her dad found out. This is Luan's granddad. And she smiles skewly and she says, you know, I take it you've studied about apartheid at school. And Luan nods his head. She said, then you know about having a relationship across the color lines. And in those days it was illegal. Uncle Jackson always made a joke of the whole thing and said it's a wonder that the government didn't ban jelly babies. Just think of all those different colored people in the same packet. And that also meant that they would both have ended up in jail if the story came out. Late one night, Jackson came and knocked on her window. His face had been beaten quite badly. One of Luan's grand's father's friends was a policeman. And they went round to Jackson's house and they threatened him. They said, if you don't leave this town, we are going to tell your story will come out, and we will ruin both of your futures. Jackson took his life into his hands that night, and he went to knock on Luan's grand's window. And he said that he'd found an opportunity to get to Cape Town with friends of his dad. The political situation was getting a bit too bad, and he wanted to go overseas, study art, and get involved in the struggle overseas. And he wanted Luan's gran to go with. And Luan sort of swallowed when he saw that his gran was wiping away a tear. And this is the very first time that he's ever seen his gran crying. Ek kon nie, sê sy, asof sy hom verskoning vra. Al was ek verskriklik lief vir hom, het ek nie kans gesien om alles net te los nie. My hele lewe, sy glimlag tussen die trane deur. So my pa het dit toe daarom reg gekry om 'n skandaal te keer. 'n Jaar wat later het 'n jong dominee die Desembervakansie op ons dorp kom preek. En 'n paar maande later het hy my bo in 'n windpomp gevra om met hom te trou. Die lug begin koeler word. Ek steek my hande in my baadjiesakke. 'n Ruk lank staan ons net so, sonder om 'n woord te sê. En die foto's, ouma? Vra ek. Dit was jare gelede, sê sy, 'n hele paar jaar na die einde van apartheid. Op 'n dag het ek uit die bloute 'n oproep van Jackson gekry. Na al die jare. Ek het soms sy naam in artikels oor haar Suid-Afrikaanse kunstenaars gesien. Hy het groot naam gemaak oor see. Ons het nooit kontak probeer maak nie, maar nou was hy terug in die land, op ons groot dorp. Hy het 'n plaasie gekoop. en hy wou my graag sien. En ouma het seker nie vir oupa daarvan vertel nie, vra ek. Sy sug en glimlag hartseer. Nee, nie in die begin nie. Ek het gesê ek het 'n blaaskans van die pastorie nodig. Ek ry om 'n paar dae lank foto's in die Karoo te neem, maar mense op klein dorpies sien alles raak en geheime hou hier nie lank nie. So his grand's telling him that she couldn't go with Wim Jackson when he wanted to go overseas, almost as though she's apologizing to Luan. Although she was extremely in love with Wim Jackson, she didn't see a chance to just leave everything. She would have given up her whole life. She smiles between the tears. So my father, says his gran, managed to get it right to stop a scandal from happening. A year or so later, a young Dimini came and visited their town in the December holidays, and a few months later he proposed to her on the top of the windmill, as we read in one of the previous chapters. The air started to get a bit colder, and Luan put his hands in his jacket pocket, and for a while they stood there without saying a word. And then Luan says, "And what about the photos, Gran?" And she says, "That was years ago, quite a few years after the end of apartheid. One day, out of the blue, I got a phone call from Jackson, after all the years. She'd sometimes read articles about him, about South African artists, because he made quite a big name for himself overseas. They never really tried to contact each other, but now that he was back in the country, and he was in the town where they grew up, he'd bought a farm, and he was really keen to see her. And Luan says, "And Gran, you probably didn't tell Opa about this." And she sighs and she smiles and sadly and says, "No, not in the beginning. I didn't, I just told him I needed to have a bit of a break from the church and the pastory, which is like the church committees and things, and that I wanted to go to the Karoo for a few days to take some photographs. But people in small towns notice everything, and secrets don't last long in these little Karoo towns." Skielik verstaan ek waarom my pa hulle al die jare so gesukkel het om met my ouma oor die weg te kom. Hulle het geweet. Hulle het destyds net soos al die ander mense uitgevind van haar en oom Jackson. My ouma, die dominee se vrou, het 'n affair gehad. Sounds weird. Dit verklaar waarom my pa nog steeds so ongemaklik rondtrap as hy my ouma sien, en waarom ons so min by haar gaan kuier. "Ek was lief vir jou oupa," sê sy. "Anders sou ek nie die keuse gemaak het om terug te gaan na hom toe nie. Maar glo my, dit was nie maklik nie. Ek dink aan oom Jackson se huis wat na olieverf en curry ruik, aan die heldekleurige skilderye teen die mure, aan die troppie bokke wat elke aand huis toe kom. Ek kry my ouma skielik baie jammer. Wat sien sy as sy daarna kyk? 'n ander lewe, een wat sy nooit gehad het nie? Dit is so onregverdig," sê ek met 'n skors stem. "Hoekom mag ander mense kies hoe 'n mens se lewe moet uitdraai?" Sy skud haar kop heftig. "Nee, dit maak nie saak wat ander mense aan jou doen nie. Onthou een ding, jy het altyd 'n keuse. Hoe moeilik dit ook al mag wees, en selfs al dwing jou omstandighede jou om 'n verkeerde keuse te maak, solank jy onthou die keuse was joune." Sy glimlag en sit haar arm om my skouer. "Ons het by die huis kom," sê sy. Jy moet jou skaap gaan kos gee." Right, so suddenly Luan understands why his father and the rest of the family for so many years struggled to get on with the gran, because they knew about the situation. And all those years ago, just like the other people, they had found out about Wim Jackson. His gran, the dominee's wife, the minister's wife, had an affair. That explains why his father still kind of gets a bit uncomfortable when Gran's around, and that's why they never used to go and visit Gran. I really did love your grandfather, she says. Otherwise, I wouldn't have made the choice to go back to him. But believe me, it wasn't easy. And Luan thinks about Jackson's house full of oil paints and curries, flavors, about the bright colored paintings against the walls, and the herd of goats that every evening come home in the evening. And he suddenly feels a bit sorry for his Gran. What does she see when she thinks, or what does she think about when she sees, or when she looks at Jackson's situation now? Another life, one that she never had. And he says to his Gran, it's so unfair. Why do other people have to end up making choices for you? And then his Gran shakes her head and she says, no, it doesn't matter what other people do to you. Remember one thing, you always have a choice. As difficult as it may be, and even if you are forced by circumstances to make the wrong choice, as long as you remember that the choice was yours. She smiles and puts her arm around Luan's shoulder. We must get to the house, she says. You need to go and feed your sheep.